Due to the content in this presentation, parental guidance is recommended to 16 years. The Christianization of Norway was a long and brutal affair that ultimately would be one of the causes to the end of the Viking era. Some converted to Christianity out of practical or economic reasons, while others were forcefully converted by the sword. The first tries were unsuccessful, but when Olaf Haroldson, the later Saint Olav, came to power, a new faith began its relentless march across Norway, Christianity. And with this, a new power factor had entered Norway, and it would hold its ruthless grip on power for the next 900 years, throwing Norwegian society into a dark age. This is Viking history with Magnus. But before we begin, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel a lot, and blah, blah, blah. 9th century Norway was marked by the encounter with a new faith for the Vikings. The first encounter was at Lindisfarne and other monasteries, where the Vikings were brutal and showed no mercy to these Christian believers. However, some warriors and merchants in Anglo-Saxon England and the Frankish Empire had adopted primus signatio, the sign of the cross, or baptism, not necessarily because they were true believers, but to allow them to enter retinue or trade. However, the Danish king Harald Bluetooth's baptism in 965 was a major turning point. A united Denmark was now ruled by a Christian king, whom also controlled parts of southern Norway. However, the first Norwegian Christian king came before Bluetooth, and was Håkon the Good, who ruled Norway from 934 to 961. He was brought up in England in the court of King Ethelstan, where he received a new faith. King Håkon the Good brought the first missionaries to Norway and confessed his Christianity in public, but his faith was not as warmly embraced in Norway, and he was opposed by many. They were told to throw out their gods, who fought bravely in battles, drank mead in Valhalla, and had a very positive view of sexuality, for a man that was crucified like one of their victims on a cross. This made no sense for many Vikings, and when King Håkon angrily confronted the pagans, he was humiliated and forced to sacrifice to the old gods to avoid an open revolt. It was a very embarrassing scene that demonstrated the power Norwegian farmers had over their kings, and now Christianity in Norway became a much politicized arena. He also attended pagan festivities to reassure the landowners, while worshipping his Christian god in private. In Norway, some of the first individuals or families whom accepted the new faith took place from above, meaning, if you wanted to be important and in favor of the king or jarl, you had to convert, and it was the elite around the king who first did so, but few Viking commoners were Christian at this time. In 961, Håkon was killed by his nephews Harald, Gamli, and Guttorm, and they now took over until about 970. Although they are not described very positively in sources, they were also Christians. Harald was Norwegian king together with several of his brothers, and his kingship is often associated not with him in particular, but with all of Eric's sons. They received the royal dignity as successors of Harald Fairhair and Eric Bloodaxe, but were also dependent on their maternal uncle, the Danish king Harald Bluetooth. However, maybe learning from their predecessor, they did not carry out missionary activities or try to convert their subjects, and both religions were tolerated. In 970, Jarl Håkon Sigurdarson became king of Norway, and avenged the death of his father Sigurdur by killing King Harald. He was not a Christian, but was the last pagan Norwegian ruler, and according to the sagas, he was a patron and worshipper of the Norse gods. However, being pragmatic, he was baptized in Denmark in exchange for granting Norway a fief, but after returning to Norway, he gave up Christianity and evicted the priests and clergymen. In 995, Olaf Tryggvason returned from abroad, and with the help of some jarls from Trondelag who had started an uprising against Håkon, something that ended with the king being killed by one of his slaves. Olaf was a Christian who was baptized in England in 991, and once Håkon was dead, he began to intensively promote his new faith. He built churches and had missionaries spreading the new religion, and he is the founder of Nidaros, today's Trondheim, and built a church there. Those who refused to convert were brutally killed, pagan temples were burnt to the ground, and Nordic god symbols were destroyed. Nevertheless, many of those who now changed their faith practiced the Norse gods in private. King Olav also played a pivotal role in the Christianization of Iceland. He dispatched Tangbrand, a German missionary to the island that at this time was under Norway's rule, to convert Iceland. Check out my video for more on that. To make the choice easier for the Icelandic Vikings, Olav detained their relatives in Norway, leveraging them as hostages to ensure compliance. Tangbrand encountered resistance in Iceland. However, by the year 1000, Iceland officially adopted Christianity at its Althing, the historic Viking parliament. This was probably not because the Icelandic people had suddenly seen the light, but because they didn't want a war with Norway, which Iceland was a province of at this time. King Olaf Tryggvason met his end in the Battle of Svolder the same year, and would later be elevated to saint by the Catholic Church, paving way for the Danish king Canute the Great, who ruled the great Nordic Empire. Olaf Haroldson's own baptism is steeped in historical lore. He was baptized either in 1013 or the early months of 1014 in Rouen by an archbishop. Intriguingly, the royal sagas tells that young Olav had been baptized earlier in his childhood, with Olaf Tryggvason serving as his godfather. By 1015, Olaf Haroldson set sail for Norway with only a pair of nars. This strategic move came at a critical juncture. Canute the Great had mobilized substantial forces for England, accompanied by Eric Jarl. Meanwhile, Norway found itself under the governance of Eric's youthful son, Hakon, and his sibling, Svein. Upon reaching Norway's western shores, Olav's unexpected appearance led to Hakon's capture. However, Hakon's release came with a stipulation. He must leave for England and never return to Norway. By distributing the silver he brought and securing backing from Ringerike and Uppland, he garnered additional allies. All this culminated on Palm Sunday 1016, when Olav won a decisive naval victory at Nesjar, crushing the chieftains Jarl Svein and his allies. Olaf Haroldson now seized the Norwegian throne, becoming the 8th king of Norway. Olaf was popular because the Norwegians wanted to gain independence from Denmark and Sweden, and Olaf was Norwegian. Once an atrocious villain who had plundered churches and cities, Olaf had been baptized and had an ardent desire to revamp all of Norway and make it like the other feudal kingdoms of Europe. Olav now started a Christian transformation. He had the means and authority to organize the church and forbid the pagan gods. In this way, he motivated purposeful nobles and landlords to embrace a new faith with the prospect of personal gain and the growth of political influence. He founded the Church of Norway and introduced a series of new laws rooted in Christian ethics, and Olav's brutal christening of Norway now begins in earnest. Olaf was zealous in promoting faith, and the sources mention the peasant revolt against him as a pagan reaction to his violence, not because of his religion. Christianization proceeded faster in coastal areas, while it was slower in the mainland, and Olaf devoted himself to missionary activities in Uppland with soldiers and sword in his hand. Meaning, you convert to the Christian God or you die. The Norse temples were burned to the ground, and all pagan symbols were destroyed. But not everyone would kneel peacefully to the new God. But in the end, they always lost somehow. People were forcefully baptized, supposedly cleansing their soul, and new churches were built over sites where pagan temples had stood once before. He now declared Christianity as the official faith of Norway, something it is still today. Many converted to Christianity, not because they were true believers, but that's how you stayed alive. The north of Norway, where the Norse gods were still practiced, was coldly opposed to Christianity, and most of the efforts to Christianize Trondelag and Halogaland during these years came to nothing. However, many of the opposition jarls were Christians, so it wasn't really about religion, but about power and influence. Olaf was eventually forced to leave Norway in 1028 and went to the Kievan Rus in modern-day Ukraine and returned to Norway in 1030. However, he was defeated and killed in the Battle of Stiklestad, which is one of the most famous battles in Norwegian history. After the battle, according to legend, several miracles happened at the place where the king died and with his body, which earned him the status of a saint by the Catholic Church. That the new Christian Vikings did not always understand the essence of the new religion correctly is quite clear and is described by the law books in the end of the 11th century. Here, new laws forbade the Viking sacrifice and celebration of Blot, the most important Viking holiday. However, the pagan funerals and old Viking sorcery and magic spells was still practiced, which means that there still was a big confusion or intermingling of the two. In other words, they did not perceive the difference between God and Christ, or the Trinity. They did not observe the holidays at the expense of the original pagan drinking culture and rituals. The Christmas tree is a good example. This was an original pagan tradition, along with many others that later has been incorporated in Christianity. Check out my video Viking Yule for more on that. Other things that now became illegal were eating horse meat, and the tradition of leaving unhealthy newborn children out in the woods to die was also forbidden. To consolidate Christianity, it was important that Norway had its saints, and Saint Halvardr and Saint Sunniva were soon canonized. With the introduction of the church and the clergy, Christianity eventually took over the power the kings, jarls, and nobles formerly had held for hundreds of years. The most powerful men in the realm were no longer the Vikings. Now it was men in robes, reading Latin from a book, a language very much unfamiliar to the Norse. And with this, a new power factor had entered Scandinavia, and it would hold its ruthless grip on power for the next 900 years, throwing Scandinavian society and culture into a dark age. Remember to like and subscribe for more videos about the Vikings. And please check out my other videos to see if there are other historical topics you find interesting. The movie that most of the clips in this video came from is The White Viking, which is about the Christianization of Norway. It's from 1991, and I had a very small part in it. That's where this picture is from, which makes me very old. And I hope to see you in the next one.